Hey everyone, David here, and I am back with another video for you all. Hopefully everybody's doing well. Hopefully you're having a great week so far. And in today's video, I am going to be talking about a training intensity tool that you can use in any program to get those maximal benefits, maximal gains in that program, no matter if it's just for general fitness or for athletic performance. And this variable is very popular. A lot of people like to use this. And today I'm going to be talking about the pros and the cons of this variable, along with maybe some other variables you can use along with this to make this even better option for your programming overall and your training intensity. Now, I wanted to touch on this variable first because it is very popular and a lot of people can get it confusing, and there is some downside to this as well. You can manipulate this variable a lot. So I wanted to just touch on it and make sure everybody's using it in the right way, along with understanding what this variable does and maybe combine it with something based off your goals and your needs. But in a future video, I will touch on intensity as a whole, because in your program, you need that intensity to get those gains, to get those benefits. You just can't go into the gym per se and just be, not pushing yourself, because you're not going to see those results. You need to push yourself at least once or twice a week. That's my belief. That's my understanding. And with all that, if you want to check out even more fitness content after you watch this video, make sure to check out the rest of my channel. I have you covered in form and technique and program design. With all that being said, let's hop into this training intensity variable video. So the variable I am talking about today is RPE. So what RPE stands for is rated perceived exertion, and I'll hop into what that means a little bit. There's two different scales with the RPE scale. There's a 6 to 20 and a 1 to 10 basically, but the RPE, so rated perceived exertion scale, is a subject measure used to gauge individuals' effort during exercise based on their perception of how hard the exercise feels. And I'm going to give you a better understanding of what this RPE variable is, the pros and the cons of using it in a program, and possibly some other ways you could look at intensity with some other variables and combine this RPE. Like I said, in today's video, we're just touching on RPE, but down the line, I will talk about exercise intensity, because that is a very important part of exercise programming. And if you want to get your gains in that athletic performance, in that fitness realm, you need to have that intensity dialed in, okay? So let's hop into this. The scale and the interpretation of the RPE is basically, like I mentioned, it could be 6 to 20, or there's some variants that could be 0 to 10. And it correlates with perceived effort with physiological response such as heart rate or oxygen consumption. So basically, this goes with the mental, physical part of exercise. So if you are doing a certain exercise per se, let's say you're doing bench press, and I ask you if you're done, how hard is that? Then that's when you use this RPE scale to look down and be like, okay, that was medium, so that was a 5. I could do a little bit more. Or like, hey, that's a 10. I can't do any more after that. Or if you're using that 6 to 20 scale, which I rarely use that 6 to 20 scale. I don't really see anybody in the fitness realm using that 6 to 20 just because there's so many numbers and it can get confusing. I will say when I do VO2 max test at my job, I do see this 6 to 20 chart being used from time to time. But overall, I like the 1 to 10 scale just because it is very straightforward and there's not a lot of numbers and people can't get confused. So basically, this RPE scale is versatile and applicable to various types of exercise, including aerobic, resistance, and interval training. So this RPE can go any way possible. So what I mean by that is plyometrics, you can use this. Resistance training, you can use this. Aerobic training, you can use this. So this has a lot of variety to it, and usually it all depends on the individual and how they're feeling. So I'll touch more on that and the pros and the cons side of things, but let's go to the application of this. So cardiovascular exercise, users rate their overall exertions based off breathing, heart rate, and sweating. Basically, that's straightforward. If you're breathing heavily, if your heart rate's up, I know a lot of people got like Apple Watches or Fitbits and stuff. Usually that tells you your heart rate and you can see what zone you're in per se. That's something you could judge with your RPE. Resistance training, focus on muscle fatigue and overall physical stress. Overall, that's just basically how you're feeling after you do that squat, that bench press, all that type of jazz. And then interval training adjustments made based on perceived effort during work to rest intervals. So basically, all that is, if you're doing an interval workout on the track, so let's say 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, during that rest, I might ask you, hey, what are you feeling between 1 to 10 at this time? And you tell me, then that's going to be the best way to get this number more accurate, I will say. You know, it gets confusing when you do, let's just say you're in your resistance training workout and you do your first exercise, and then I ask you all the way at the end of the exercise, hey, how was this first exercise in the program? How was that between a 1 to 10? That's not going to be a good look. Those people are going to forget what that first exercise is. It's better to ask each exercise during the time that you're doing that exercise, okay? It's important to ask that, not all the way at the end of the workout. And then also, too, the benefits of RPE, subject insight. So provides immediate feedback on how hard an individual feels as they're working. So kind of what I mentioned before, you get that number right then and there, and that is very good. It's very immediate, so you can make changes when you need to. Adaptability, adjust to changes in fitness level, fatigue, and environmental conditions. Kind of what I touched on before. If somebody gives me a 10 and it's the first set, I'm going to have to dial back. I'm going to have to figure something out. Or if somebody gives me a 5, I'm like, hey, I want them to hit an 8 today. So I'm going to have to increase that intensity a little bit, maybe by the rest time, or maybe by the weight, maybe by the sets or the reps. You can play around with it, see what you can do to have that, hit that goal during that day, during that workout. And then individualization, so helps tailor workouts to personal fitness levels and goals. So that's really cool about this RPE scale. It dials it into that certain person. So very individualized, and that's what's very important with your goals. Very to the point with that person, okay? Not everybody's gonna have the same goals, and that's the same with the RPE. Not everybody's gonna have the same RPE per se. You know, like, let's use this for an example. You got Jimmy, and then you got Dan. Jimmy and Dan, they're doing a, let's just say, a squat, okay? Doing a squat. Maybe possibly a little different on the weight, but then Jimmy and Dan are doing the squat, but I talked to Dan, and he's like, oh, I'm only at a 6. And then Jimmy's like, oh, I'm at a 9. So there's a big difference there, okay? That's something to look at. This is very stressful for Jimmy, but Dan, it's not too stressful, so I need him to play around with it. And if I want them to be at an 8, maybe got to drop Jimmy down a little bit and then increase Dan up a little bit to get them both at an 8 where they need to be. So Jimmy and Dan's RPE 8 is going to be at a different level in that exercise. So some limitations going off of that. So interpretation can be widely between individuals making consistent challenges. So what I just mentioned before, you know, that example I used of Jimmy and Dan, that's important. There's very big gaps between what people feel because it's so individualized to them personally, okay? And, you know, Jimmy and Dan were at different parts. So that's something to look into, the subjectivity of the RPE scale. Scale requirement. Requires users to develop a good understanding of their body's response. So basically, you got to know your body inside out to give a valid RPE scale. And if you're not bought into that program, you could lie on the RPE. You could say, oh, I'm not really feeling this. And I look at you and you're not even sweating or anything. You're telling me it's a 10. You are kind of fibbing to me and lying to me on that program, because I can tell personally, I'm like, you are not even breathing hard. There's not stuff that I can see on the outside that's making me think that you're at a 10 currently, okay? And then inaccuracy, kind of what I mentioned before, may not always correlate precisely with physiological measures like the heart rate. So your heart rate might be super up if we're wearing like that Fitbit or that Apple Watch, and then you're telling me, oh, I'm only at a 4, but your heart rate's almost over 200. Kind of what I went with before is very inaccurate measures with this RPE scale. Now hopping into the pros and the cons of the RPE, we're going to start with the pros here. Ease of use, simply to apply to a program and does not require specialized equipment. Real-time feedback allows immediate adjustment to the exercise intensity, and then individualization. So we kind of touch on those all again. Those are all pros of the RPE scale, so rated perceived exertion scale. And that's why it's so popular, because you can just get it like that and then change your workouts on the fly. Change what you need to do to get that person where they need to be on that RPE scale. And then the cons, we kind of touch on that a little bit. Subjectivity, lack of standardization can lead to variability in perceived effort. Accuracy, not as precise as objective measures like heart rate monitoring. And then training required. Users need to learn accurately assess their own exertion levels. So, sorry, kind of stuttering there a little bit. Basically, you need to learn your body inside out and know, hey, this is my limit, this is what I can do. And if you have a beginner, RPE might not be the best thing for that person to use. You might have to dig in deeper into the toolbox and see what you can find for another variable, because that person might not know their body inside out and they might be lying to you on that RPE scale. So I wanted to hop into now talking about some other measures that we can use with the RPE scale to make it more beneficial to that program, to that exercise per se. And these are several methods beside basically the RPE scale I mentioned before that can be used to judge exercise intensity in a fitness program. And these measures vary in complexity and objectivity. So basically, you got heart rate monitor. I mentioned that before in this video already. So there's a target heart rate zone based on age predicted maximal heart rate. There's an equation for that, using percentage to define intensity zone. So 50 to 85% of maximal heart rate. And like I mentioned before, there is a formula for that age predicted heart rate. And I will say the best one you can use is 220 minus age. There is another formula for that. But if you were just very beginnerish and you're just trying to figure out your programming for yourself, 220 minus age is going to be the best way to find that. And that leads into the heart rate reserve. So using resting heart rate and maximal heart rate to calculate the training zones based on the desired intensity. There's also a calculation for that heart rate reserve, and you would use that age predicts the maximal heart rate to put in that equation of the heart rate reserve. And you know, this mainly is just talking about the RPE scale in this video. I will touch more on those equations with the heart rate monitoring once I get into my full intensity video. So let's hop into the next one. Power output is the next variable that you can use. Like for cycling, you can use wattage. Measures power output generated by the individual, providing direct measure of their work rate. So basically, the faster you're going to be on that bike, the more wattage you're going to get, and you can use that along with the RPE. And then you got speed for running. Measures the pace or speed at which an individual is running, which correlates with that intensity. So using the RPE with speed and running, that might be good variables to use depending on your goal and depending on who you're working with or yourself. If you're a speed athlete or a speed fitness enthusiast, this might be a good measure to use. And then you got METs, so they're called metabolic equivalents. So the MET scales quantifies the intensity of various activities in terms of rate of energy expenditure related to resting metabolic rate. Okay, so basically this is, I would say, out in the field, this is probably the most rare one that you're gonna see. You learn this I learned this in school. I don't really see this one being used at all in the field too much, so I wouldn't really worry about this one. But if you want to use this one, make sure you do your research on this variable here, because it is something that you can use to judge the intensity of somebody. And with the RPE scale, it might be beneficial for what you're trying to achieve to use that METs and RPE. Now, you know, another one, of course, we just talked about, it's RPE. So there's two scales on this. You got the board scale, so it could be 0 to 10 or 6 to 20. And then there's a category ratio scale. This one basically uses 0 to 10 to rated perceived exertion, focus on overall exertion and fatigue. Basically, the Borg scale is more traditionally at 6 to 20, but there is Borg scales that are 0 to 10. So with all that being said, I don't want to get you all confused. Just remember 0 to 10 or 6 to 20, okay? You don't need to know the different types of ratios and scales and all that type of jazz. All right, don't need to worry about that. Now, another variable you can use is VO2. So don't get VO2 and VO2 max mixed up. They're very similar variables. So VO2 max measures the maximum amount of oxygen an individual can utilize during intense exercise, indicating aerobic capacity and intensity. So that's why we do VO2 max tests. And when I'm at work, I use my chart up top, and I have the RPE, and I'll have every 2 minutes, I'll have them point to somewhere on that chart so they can see, hey, this is how intense I'm going. And then also, too, with that VO2 max test, you know, we're looking how much amount of oxygen an individual can utilize during that intense exercise. And I will say with the VO2 max test, you're also going to use a heart rate monitor, too, to make sure the heart rate's in good zones, too, to use with that RPE scale. So distance and duration, that's another thing you can use if you have a very limited budget, I guess you could say, or, you know, limited equipment. Distance and duration. So distance covered measures the total distance traveled during exercise as an indicator of workload and intensity. duration measures the time spent exercising, indicating the duration of exposure to a particular intensity level. Excuse me, sorry. Little tongue twister there. And then last but not least one we can use, and this is probably one of the most popular ones in the resistance training realm, and it is 1 repetition max. Basically, all that is it's using resistance training to determine the maximum weight a person can lift for a specific exercise, guiding intensity for strength and hypertrophy goals. Now, I will say with the 1 RM, a lot of people, depending on your goal, you could use a 3 RM, you could use a 6, could use an 8, could use a 12 RM. I know when I was in cross country and track, we did a 12 RM test. We didn't do a 1. We did a 12 just because you don't need maximal strength if you're a cardiovascular athlete, all right? So keep that in mind. Make sure you're using the test in the right areas. So VO2 max test, that's going to be important for a cross country runner, all right? But a 1 repetition max, I don't really think so. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you want to judge maximal strength for some reason, hey, go for it. But at the same time, I'd probably use a 6, 8, or 10 rep max with a cross-country or track athlete. And basically, each method has its strengths and weaknesses, and the choice often depends on specific goals of the fitness program, the preferences of the individual, or basically if you're training yourself, you know, me per se, if I'm training somebody, and the availability of the equipment and resources. Combining multiple methods can be more comprehensive in assessment of exercise intensity and help tailor workouts to your desired levels in intensity or your outcomes as well. So everybody, hopefully you learned a little bit more about RPE. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments about RPE, and do you use RPE? Do you use other things combined with RPE? I'm really interested to hear. Start up a conversation. I'll be more than willing to join in, and let me know if you have any more questions on intensity that I can answer down the line, because I am going to be talking about this topic a lot. And it's very important when you're programming. I've just realized that a lot of people aren't hitting those intensity levels that they need to see those maximal gains, to see those maximal benefits in the program. So I want to deliver this information out to you all, and you can maybe form it into your own words and your own understanding to get that information into that program and use it right and use it correctly. Like I said, I'm going to be touching on many more topics in this exercise intensity realm, but I wanted to reach out with the rated perceived exertion today. And let me know in the comments down below if you already use RPE. And I'm just rambling on now, so I'm going to head out of here. You all have a good rest of your day, rest of your night, rest of your afternoon, morning, whenever you're watching this. And I will see you on the next video.